It's 1 minute past the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to Parenting with Vasculitis. I am Ashley from the Vasculitis Foundation, and excited to be joined by three guests who will introduce themselves in just a moment. We offer these webinars for free to all of you, to our community, but that's thanks to our sponsors, Amgen, AstraZeneca, and Novartis. All right, so with that, I think we will go ahead and dive in. I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves. Dr. Sims, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Dr. Katherine Sims. I am a rheumatologist in North Carolina, and my clinical and research focuses mostly on reproductive health in patients who have autoimmune diseases, including vasculitis. And I've been working with the Vasculitis Pregnancy Registry for the past 4 years now, and I'm really excited to be here. Ashley, I don't know if I should go ahead and share disclosures now. Okay,
Yeah,
so
sure, go for it.
I am a consultant for Amgen, which is one of the sponsors for today's event.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Sims. Heather, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Heather. I was diagnosed with Takayama arteritis at 13 in 1997, so I've been doing this for a while. I have two children, two boys. One is 5 and one just turned 1. And I am a patient research partner with the VPPRN, and I work with Dr. Sims and some of our other doctors to try to get things off the ground and kind of give a patient perspective. And I'm super excited to be here and kind of answer some questions about parenting with vasculitis.
We're grateful you're here, Heather. Kaden, it's your turn.
My name is Kayden Carter. I was diagnosed with GPA in 2021. I've been married for a little over 6 years now. We have a beautiful daughter named Reese. She's 14 months. So still pretty new with the vasculitis stuff and parenting. So I feel like every day I'm learning something new about everything. So it's good to be here.
It's good to have you here, Kaden. My first question, I want to go to Dr. Sims. So when we talked, to our community about parenting with vasculitis and what questions they have, one of the biggest things that came up was, is this hereditary? Do I have to think about my children getting vasculitis? So what's the science on that?
So we have more data on autoimmune diseases like lupus. And so a lot of what we know about hereditary, the heritability of autoimmune diseases comes from more common autoimmune conditions. So I don't know of any specific studies in vasculitis, just to put that out as a disclaimer. But in our patients who have lupus, they typically are having children more often because they're diagnosed younger. And what we tell them is that their child likely has a slightly elevated risk of developing an autoimmune condition compared to the general population. And so one of the lupus specialists that I work with typically tells them that their child has less than a 10% chance of developing an autoimmune condition, including lupus, even though the mother has lupus specifically. So what I tell patients is that we are still trying to understand why autoimmune diseases arise. So we know that it's some combination of the person's genetics interacting with the environment around them. And that can include the type of environment that they're in. Something triggers the onset of an autoimmune condition where then the immune system is attacking itself, where normally the immune system is supposed to recognize itself. And that relationship is still not fully understood. There's a lot of research going on, especially with climate change and the rates of autoimmune diseases being different in different countries and in different climates. We know that there is some link between the two, but it's important to understand the distinction of genetics versus hereditary. So something can be an interaction between a person's genetics and their environment and their environmental exposures, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that genetic factor is being inherited by their child. So it's what I tell patients is there potentially could be an increased risk, but from what we see in the lupus data, nothing extraordinarily high, less than 10% is typically what we say in clinic. And it's important if your child starts to develop certain symptoms that are either similar to yours or they're having symptoms that doctors cannot explain. Your own personal health is a huge importance when that doctor is working things up. So like if Heather's son became sick, knowing Heather's history, hey, I have Takayasu and I was diagnosed as a child, that's pertinent information and your provider should know that because it might trigger them to think, okay, maybe we should be looking at more rare autoimmune conditions because this child does have a family history. And whenever I see a new patient, family history is a big part of me meeting them and understanding their potential diagnosis or what they're at risk for. So we know it certainly plays a role, but I also do not want patients to feel like their child has to establish with a rheumatologist as soon as they're born, that they have to screen for these things. So like in Heather's case, I would not recommend that both of her children undergo screening for Takayasu and undergo, CTs and MRIs and those kinds of things. Only if there's something symptom-wise that arises, Heather's history becomes pertinent. So all of that to say, it's still something we are looking at and investigating. And it's important to tell your doctors your own personal health history.
Thank you. That was really helpful. The next thing I want to get into is kind of a broad question, and throughout this hour, we'll probably get more specific. But I guess I'll start with you, Heather. How do you deal with the strain of balancing parenthood when you're sick, whether it's like leaning on your partner if you have one, or like what other tips do you have? What other things do you do?
Yeah, so I mean, that was kind of a discussion that we had pre-kids. Because again, I'm not a normal person and I have, you know, I guess I need more rest. I take more time to heal from anything that I catch. And so my husband and I, before we were married, we had these talks, and especially right before we started to plan for children, um, I was very clear that like he was probably going to be holding more burden at times than, a normal dad might have to like shoulder. And so, I think it's really important to kind of have those discussions up front so that you're going into it and everybody's kind of aware. And that being said, it still is like Kayden said, it's all a learning process and you kind of learn as you go. And I think the thing is that you just have to learn to communicate that. And sometimes that's hard, especially for people. I know the friends that I have who have Takayasu's and other autoimmune disease. I think we tend to be pretty strong and we try to like hold that front. And it's very hard to tell people or to ask people for help or that, I can't do this. And I'm also fortunate that I have a really good friend who hears me and sees me for the sick person and loves me for the sick person that I am, and has also kind of stepped up and given my son opportunities. Like when we're hanging out, I can't always go on like a long hike, or I need a second to rest. And she will often go and take the kids and take him on a hike that I may not be able to do with him. My husband's the same way. I work full time, and depending on how my health is or how work is or how stressed I am or what's going on, there are Saturdays when I just need to sleep in, and I have to, instead of being upset that, like I'm not feeling well and nobody is helping me, I have to make sure that I communicate that up front. And usually it's just me being like, hey, tomorrow morning, I need you to keep the kids in the other room so that I can get extra rest because I'm just really struggling. And I found that for us and for me, that's really what has worked, was just being open and communicating, which is often hard because as a parent, right, you want to show up for your kids and you want to do everything for them. But the reality is that like with most of us, if I overdo it too much, then I pay for it for days. And so kind of not doing, and sometimes it's hard because you're like, I am not the same parent that my girlfriend is, and that's okay. And my son is used to that. My younger son he will be fully aware that that's just how it is some days, and they don't know any different. That's the great thing about children. They're so resilient. And so I think, just for me, I just try to communicate what I need in order to take care of myself, because if you can't take care of yourself and you don't take care of yourself, you cannot take care of your children. And so it's hard sometimes to really put yourself kind of second, but almost first, and asking your partner to kind of give you that grace. And, and I think that's when it's important to make sure that they're aware. And that doesn't mean that we don't have times where he's like, what is going on? And I also need rest. But, like I have to kind of stand up and be like, look, between the two of us today, it's me. I get some time. I just need this for myself in order, to function.
Yeah, I think that's so brilliant that the communication is key, whether it's with your husband or your friend or whomever it might be. And yet acknowledging that, as simple as that sounds, like communicate clearly, it's not easy. necessarily, and not wanting to feel like a burden or asking for too much or all the other things that could come up around stuff like that. What about you, Kaden? How do you find that is when you try to balance this in your relationship with your wife?
Yeah, kind of feeding off what she said. I think just having a good support group, not just wife, but I think family and friends, I think is super helpful. Um, it seems like I have been fortunate enough to be pretty healthy since we've had our daughter. That being said, when I do feel tired or whatever, I take advantage of when she's down for a nap or whatever. So those are kind of the times that I take for myself. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is just having a good support group around you.
Yeah, yeah, and like you said, it could be family or friends, whether you have a partner or not. Uh, One of the things that also has come up with other parents with vasculitis is how do you prepare for a hospitalization? Hopefully, like Kaden said, you've been pretty healthy since your daughter's been born, but you just kind of never know. So, any of you, whoever wants to weigh in, go for it.
So honestly, that's not something I've really thought of because like I said, I've been healthy, but my wife's in medical school right now, so I'm the only one working. So I'm a firefighter paramedic full time. We work 2 days on, have 4 days off. So the 4 days off is pretty nice, but sometimes that 2 days on, we can stay pretty busy. I like to keep a pretty good savings account just in case I do get sick again. Um, if I do go down, I can't work. I want to still be able to take care of my family and let my wife continue to go to school and stuff like that. So that's one way I prepare.
Mm.
But yeah, like thinking of kids, someone to watch my kid, I haven't really thought of that, but
No, I
hopefully.
think it's sorry. I think it's smart that you mentioned the financial aspects. I hadn't even thought of that, but of course that's real. Heather, what do you do to prepare? And then Dr. Sims will go to you if you have any tips that you share with your patients.
Yeah, so I have an older one, so he's 5. And so I've had like one night in the middle of the night, I had a kidney stone. I had to go to the emergency room. We just packed him up and went. I've been very cognizant of making the hospital and making my doctors a very happy and friendly place for him. So my doctors were very involved. My rheumatologist was super excited about the baby. So I've always brought them in to show her. I now have virtual appointments. So I bring him on camera so he can see her. I've always tried to make it a place that is like a safe place for him, right? And not the typical, like, we have to go to the doctor. This is scary. You have to
Mhm.
get shots at the doctor. So because I know that's a place that I at times end up a lot, I've always wanted him to think of it as a safe and a good place because if he has to come visit me, and he did when I had my second son, I had a C-section. And he was 4 at the time, and I was very open but appropriately open with, what was going to be happening, especially because I couldn't hold him and I didn't want him to come in and that to be a shock. And so I really tried to prepare him for the fact that mommy's going to be there and she's probably going to be in some pain. And again, you do it age appropriately. And so um I've never tried to be scary. He knows that I'm in pain. He knows that I'm not feeling well. And for the C-section, he was allowed to come to the hospital. Thankfully, the COVID restrictions were kind of lifted, and I think at least he could still see me. And again, FaceTime is a big one, right? So if they can't see you, you can still FaceTime them. And I think even when things are really bad, you can still kind of muster up enough to get on FaceTime and make it like this is not it's not a big deal. Mommy's here, like they're taking care of me. This is where I need to be. And I think that's it was easy. He came to the hospital. It was no big deal. He was like, okay. And I've just really tried to, from when he was little, to just kind of involve him. So I don't think he fully understands at 5. He doesn't understand that I'm sick. He knows that I take medication. He knows that I see my doctors, but he doesn't comprehend that there's something serious going on. And I don't think at this age that he needs to. And so it's all very age appropriate for him. But again, I've just really tried to make this like doctors are really good people and we love them. And they're part of my family at this point because my doctor's been my doctor for, since before I've had kids. And so again, I think exposing them to that is really important because the reality is most of us are going to end up in a hospital at some point or another, whether you break a foot or it's your vasculitis. And I think that, we have a higher chance. And so I think it's really important to like make that like, oh, mommy's going to go. I tell him when I go to the doctors, I'm like, I'm going to go to the doctor today. I get to go see my doctor. Like, isn't that exciting? And so I think there's just little things that you can do that then when things do go kind of bad and you are really sick, again, they're so resilient and they don't fully understand at least at the young age, they don't fully understand. And so it's a good time to kind of mold them into the fact that like this is a good place, this is a safe place, and this is where we need to be. And not I mean, I had friends growing up that were like very afraid of the hospital, and like I thankfully never had that, even though definitely had bad experiences in the hospital. But I think making that a good place, there's treats there, there's vending machines, and doing what you can to like encourage kind of that good attitude, and including them when things are good, right? So he's in my doctor's appointments when things are going well. That way, when things are bad, he's also there with the doctors and they're the same people. So it's not just, I only see these people or this place when things are bad for my mom.
I love that because it's like you're creating this intentional awareness that this is not necessarily a place of panic to go to a doctor's office. Yeah. Dr. Sims, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just going off of what Heather, you're saying about kids being resilient. So I listened to a patient panel, and again, this was with patients with lupus, where they were talking about parenting with lupus. And they talked about how it's hard for them sometimes to do daily tasks like laundry and dishes, like just because of fatigue. And they noticed that their children they were helping out with these tasks at home and becoming very independent. And so the other mothers would say, oh, how does your son know how to do that? And the son would say, my mama has lupus, so I know how to do this stuff because she's trained me to help her in the house. And the kids just become extremely well-rounded and very independent and very helpful. And so it's kind of a silver lining when you're honest with your kids about what you need, and then they can, kind of adjust to what you need for help in the house. So that was one thing I just thought of while you guys were talking. The other thing is about flaring and talking with your doctors about the burden of medical care. So when you have a chronic condition, you have a lot of doctor's appointments, you have a lot of labs, imaging, like there's so much of your life and time that is dedicated to assessing the chronic condition, especially if you're seeing your rheumatologist every 3 to 6 months. So being transparent with patient or with your doctors and saying, can we do telemedicine? Because it's so much easier than me trying to bring my child to the clinic, finding parking, finding childcare, anything like that. So seeing if that's an option, and then trying to consolidate appointments and piggyback them on other appointments. If you're seeing your kidney doctor, seeing your rheumatologist at the same time. I had a patient on Monday who was like, can we do labs at my next infusion instead of sticking me today and then sticking me at my infusion? And I was like, absolutely, that's a great idea. So just finding little ways, and your doctors will probably not think of that at that time because they're just thinking about moving, assessing, checkbox, all that kind of stuff. They may mean well, but they probably don't know your life circumstances completely, or they're not thinking about how to make things the easiest for you necessarily. And that's not a bad thing. It's just how doctors are thinking in the moment. So maybe communicating, hey, how about we do telemedicine every other visit? And then also talking about having a plan for a flare. So I had a patient on Monday who's about to give birth, and she's like, I'm really nervous about having a flare in the postpartum. And this can go on, a lot of patients have anxiety about an impending flare. And one thing is regular follow-up with your rheumatologist or your doctor so that you are constantly being assessed. So we hopefully minimize the chances of a flare popping up out of nowhere, but sometimes they do pop up out of nowhere, even when you do everything right. And so having a plan with your doctor. So with that patient, I was like, here's a prednisone prescription, keep it in your medicine cabinet. And if you flare, you have it. And when you take it, you send me a message so that I don't have to call you back. In that moment, you don't have to call me. I call you back. I send a script. You go fill it when you're not feeling well, and then you take it. So we just cut out all of those little interim steps, and you can just take the prednisone and then call me. And then you're feeling better, hopefully, or we're addressing the problem. And then I can talk to you, and we can come up with next steps. So having a plan with your doctor. And then also if your doctor's like, hey, listen, I think you need to be hospitalized. I've had patients before say, I have 2 young kids at home. I live 2 hours away. This is not a feasible option for me. And of course, we talk about the risks of not being hospitalized, but I often can adapt my plan in patient to be outpatient. And whether that's going to a local hospital, doing outpatient medications like high dose steroids, IV outpatient to try to keep them out of the hospital. And of course, I will tell them, like, I don't think that's safe in this situation, but I understand where you're coming from. Let's see how we can meet in the middle to keep you at home with your, like, one patient was like, I'm breastfeeding. I don't want to be in the hospital for 3 to 5 days. I know that doesn't sound like a lot to you as a doctor, but that's 3 to 5 days of me being separated from my newborn and not being able to breastfeed them. So communicating, like Heather was saying, you communicate with your partner, like communicate with your doctor the same way, because they're not going to likely be able to predict what you need personally.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it goes back to Heather's point about communication and also self-advocacy for speaking up for what you need, and then hopefully your doctor can work with you to see what fits there. Some of the other questions we got from parents is like, how do I prepare to send my child to daycare when I'm immunocompromised? Or what do I do? There's like a big family gathering I want to go to, but I'm not sure if I should. So I'll start with you, Dr. Sims. When you talk to patients about this, how do you talk to them about the risks and benefits of doing that?
So I tell them, first of all, to live their life. I actually just got a notification that the FDA has approved new COVID boosters from Pfizer and Moderna for the summer wave of COVID. So I talk to patients about, let's do everything we can to protect you as much as possible so that you can live your life. Like, I don't want you at home, not seeing family, not going to events, not going to concerts, not going to get your hair done. I mean, these are actual conversations I've had with patients. There are times where we're more cautious. When the COVID pandemic first happened, we were still figuring things out and there was no vaccine. But now we've moved into a space where, just like with the flu, it's probably going to be something that we live with. And we have a vaccine and we have antivirals. So I come up with a plan for patients. I tell them that if they're in an enclosed area, like a plane or a train or a concert where there's like a lot of close people to them, I would consider wearing an N95 mask if you cannot safely distance yourself from people. Now, if you're going to a family gathering, you can request that your family let you know if they're having symptoms so that you can create space. Or you can ask people to take a COVID test before they come to the family function. That is certainly a fair thing to ask. And that's, again, that communication. Hey guys, like, I have this chronic condition. I'm on immunosuppressive medications. I'm really trying to stay as healthy as possible for myself and for my family. Could you please consider taking a COVID test before this big event? Or if they have symptoms, to just distance themselves from you or to stay home. And I think sometimes people feel bad about making those requests, and you really shouldn't. Just like the things I was talking about, making requests with your doctor and advocating for yourself. I mean, you have good intentions, and people who love and care about you will recognize the importance of those requests and they will abide by them. And I think it's really important to just voice to people what you need. The other thing is getting boosted as much as possible with the COVID vaccine. I ask patients if they haven't been boosted in the last year to get boosted. I gave out maybe 2 or 3 COVID shots on Monday. And then I'm advising people to get flu shots as well. Testing at home is frequently, like, if you develop symptoms, just test yourself at home. You can buy over-the-counter nasal swab tests. And then if you're positive, contacting your doctors. Truthfully, in my opinion, I would contact all of your doctors because each doctor takes a different amount of time to get back to you. So I have some patients that just contact me first because I happen to get back fastest, and I can prescribe them an antiviral, whether it's the pill Paxlovid or an infusion. I will say, just as a note, I've heard Paxlovid tastes terrible, and if you mix it with peanut butter, it helps with the taste. So I've heard that from patients, in case anybody on here has to take it in the future. But having a game plan and living the life you want to, like, I want my patients to travel and to live, like, I want them to have a good quality of life. And there's going to be some amount of risk with that. Of course, there's going to be more risk going out of your home than staying in your home for the rest of your life. But it's really that benefit of being happy and being engaged in your community and with your family. N95 masks are superior to surgical masks, which is typically what places will hand out, are these like flimsy surgical masks. And I would say you can buy N95s online. And so I would just have a stock of them and then wear them in certain situations where you're close to people or symptomatic. And if you've had a known exposure, test yourself. And low threshold to contact your doctor for an antiviral. Those are easily prescribed to any local pharmacy. the two big things are kidney function and liver function. So if you have some decreased function in those organs, your doctors can talk about alternative medications for COVID. And there's also an antiviral to flu as well.
Once again, that was a lot of really useful information. Kayden, I wanted to ask you along a similar vein. I know you
Yeah.
talked about, firefighter, paramedic, and when you were looking after, I guess, your diagnosis to go back to work, you had hesitancy for a moment because you're around a lot of sick people, and yet you said something like, "I don't want to quit my life," like in alignment with
Yeah.
what Dr. Sims is saying. Can you speak to that?
Kind of like she was saying, just wearing an N95, I think's helped me out a lot. When I was first diagnosed, I did avoid everybody. For some reason in my head, I thought everybody was sick, which isn't the case. But yeah, going to work was something I kind of weighed. Should I go back or should I not? But kind of how Doc was saying, like, you can't quit your life. So I did go back and I've been healthy since. I have had COVID one time. And yes, Paxlovid is terrible tasting. I had not heard about the peanut butter, but yes. But yeah, we can get through these things. If we do get sick, it's not worth staying at home. Sometimes the depression of staying home and making your circle super small and being away from people is worse than the vasculitis. So honestly, I think getting out and living your life and be careful for sure. Like she was saying, if you go to a family event, family should know what circumstances you're going through. So yeah, just see if anybody's sick. If someone is, yeah, you just keep your distance, wear a mask if you feel more comfortable doing that. But yeah, continue to live life and yeah.
Yeah, I like that you said it's sort of part of your overall well-being to engage in life, to
Sure.
be social. Like we're like human beings designed to be in connection. Um, Heather, I wanted to ask you something a little bit different. You had mentioned certain tools or lessons that you teach your son. Like you mentioned something about like what he knows about pills. Like what are some of the things that you want your children to know as a parent who has a chronic illness?
Yeah. So one thing I think that healthy parents and people who are not around medication don't anticipate is that kids pick up pills and they will put anything in their mouth. Um, Anything. And if they think it's candy or like my younger son, for some reason, that's how he tests everything out. So everything pops, like that's the first thing. It's not even like, let me see what, it's just right to the mouth. And so as soon as my older son was able to kind of understand rewards, right? Um, what I would tell him, and my second son is just mouth. My first son was a little more like, I'll look at this. And so I think what happened was he brought something one time, and I was like, if you find things on the ground, whether it's candy, whether it's a pill, like if it looks like this and you see that on the ground, if you bring it to me, you get a bunch of prizes. So he's trained that, like, even if he finds candy, if he brings it to me, then he gets more candy. So, and I also had a dad who was on chemotherapy and other pills when he was little. He's around grandparents, and the grandparents have tons of medications also. And it misses your mouth sometimes. I don't know how, but sometimes you just find pills and you're like, I have no idea how this got here. And so, and especially I'm not on them right now, but I had methotrexate like orally at one point. I take iron, which is apparently really, really dangerous for children, which I did not know, but it's all over the bottles. And so, yeah, I've been really cognizant about teaching him that, like, one, my pill bottles are not toys. My pills are not toys. And again, this goes back to adding him into the process. When I fill my like 2 weeks of pills up, I usually do it on my bed where I can see the pills against like a dark sheet or something so that I can really see what I'm doing. And he'll come in and I'll say, you cannot come like around these. You're welcome to look, but like I need to make sure that nothing gets spilled. And it's kind of that, like, these are mommy's medications. I take these to make me feel better, but they're dangerous if you eat them. And they could make you sick, and we don't want that. And so it goes back to like including them in that discussion. But I can tell you, other people don't think about this because one day my son came home from school and he had a pill bottle, like an empty pill bottle full of water. And I was like, what? And he's like, they gave this to me. It's an ice pack. And I was like, yeah, no, because we don't play with the pill bottles. We don't reuse the pill bottles, nothing, because I don't want him. Because, of course, the first thing he asks is like, can I drink the water? And I'm like, no, no, you cannot drink the water out of this unknown pill bottle. And so I I think that it's really important. And again, these are things that you don't think about, and other people aren't going to think about it either, is that there are medications in our home, and a lot of these are extremely dangerous. And if a child gets a hold of it, you may not necessarily know, and they're they may not they don't know to tell you, and they don't know what they ate. And so I think it's one of those things that, and he's brought, I think, probably 4 or 5 pills to us. The other day he found my mother-in-law's, and he's just like, look, mom. And I'm like, and he's funny because he's like, do I get a treat? And I'm like, what do you need a treat? Oh, yep, you get a treat. Like, here's some, and I try to like really reward that behavior. And I'm like, here's like 3 pieces of candy, because again, it's that like, I will bring it to you because it's not worth putting one in my mouth when I can have three. It's a little harder with the little one because he just goes to the mouth. And so thankfully I have the bigger one who sweeps everything. But again, I think it's just really important that like you don't let them play with the pill bottles, right? Like, because they rattle, they make lots of fun noise. You have to make sure that you keep that separated from them, that like these, like, again, there has to be a little bit of that, like, these are really dangerous for you and we don't want you to be hurt, and you don't know what's in there. Gummy vitamins are another one. One day, my nephew decided to help himself to my mom's gummy vitamins and shared them with my son. And thankfully, there was nothing in them. But, like, again, they look like candy. And so, with those things, you have to, like, really be cognizant that, like, when you go visit people's homes, that's the other thing, too, right? Is like, I know my medicine's dangerous. We live in a house that is kid proofed as much as one can be. And so our medicine is kept, to the side or up high where they can't reach. But I try to, like, I have kid locks on the drawers where I keep my medicine in the bedroom. You just kind of have to do what you can to teach them that like this is like really dangerous for them.
And it's a pretty good prize system. I mean, how do I get in on that? My next question, I guess Kaden, I know your daughter's so young, so I'm curious if you either have thought about what you're going to tell her and how you're going to start sharing your vasculitis with her, or if you have questions that maybe either Heather, who has slightly older kids, or Dr. Sims
Yeah.
could answer.
Yeah, so she is super young, and it's something my wife and I have talked about. Currently, right now, if I feel good, I don't know if I would explain a ton because the kid's not going to really understand what vasculitis is. But yeah, it's if I feel good, I don't know if I would probably share as much. But yeah, I was curious to see what Heather or doctor
Yeah.
recommend for that because it is a question that it's going to come up eventually. But
Yeah, Heather or Dr. Sims, do you want to take that?
I can start. So we had to have some conversation with my son because my dad had cancer, and unfortunately he was, terminal, and we knew he was going to pass away. And so my son was, from the time he was born, my dad was sick, and he passed away when my son was, I think, 3 or 4. And so we tried to be very open with that, right? And again, like Kaden, I'm doing fairly well. Things are pretty quiet most of the time, but I still have bad days. I still have kidney stones that have not a lot to do with my vasculitis, but still cause me a lot of problems. And I end up in the hospital. And I think, as my son gets older, I tell him, like, we've always been very honest and open with him, but also age appropriate. And so when he asks, it's still like, why do you take medicine? Right. And it's like, well, mommy's, has to take medicine so that her body can function. He doesn't usually ask why because he doesn't really understand. He's like, okay. And I think at some point it will be like more of a why. And I think for me, my kind of thing is that like I educate him, right? Because I do think that the unknown is much more scary, especially for children, when you're just like, well, I'm in the hospital. I'll be back in like 3 days. And it's like, what? And so I've tried to like kind of piecemeal it for him where it's like, I take medicine. This is mommy's medicine. Mommy's tired some days. Like, and I think for me, I'll probably find like a diagram, right, of the vascular system and be like, yep. And for me, it's simple. I'm just like, my body's not real pleasant sometimes, and it attacks itself. Like, and when it does, it causes an artery. And I think that'll become, more descriptive and more involved as he gets older. But I think the main thing is for him and for any child is they want to know, like, are you going to be okay? And
Mhm.
it's like, yes, mommy's having a hard time today, but it's okay. Like, you know, and I think that's the thing is because my dad passed away, then he's like, well, are you sick like Bampa? And it's like, no,
Mhm.
no, I'm not. I am not sick like Bampa. Like Bampa had cancer. And so I think it's important to have those discussions with them, but it's age appropriate, right? My 1 year old, I don't go around discussing the advanced, disease of Tachyon. So I don't pull my x-rays up and I'm like, here's an MRI of my arteries. They're and that's the great thing. They're so resilient. And because this is the only life that my children will know, it is okay for them. And I think that's what you have to realize. And that's what's scary going into parenting is you're like, am I going to be able to like be the parent that I want to be? And I can tell you right after I had my first son, I had some complications not related to vasculitis, and he was brand new, probably like 2 days old, and I just got out of the ICU, and I knew something was wrong. And they start patting my bed, which is because they thought I was going to seize, and things were just really bad. And I remember him sitting there screaming, and I can't help him. And I just remember thinking, maybe I made a mistake. Like, I can't take care of this child. And the thing was, is like, that was probably the only time that I've ever thought that. And it was just those initial, like, being scared to be a parent. And parenting is scary, whether you're healthy or sick. But being sick, there's always that inadequacy, like that feeling of inadequacy. And the reality is that your children will only ever know you as this parent, and they will love you regardless of whether you're sick and whether you have days. And the thing is, they don't remember those days. They only remember that like they had fun with you and you find things to do, right? I can't always run around with him. So we do things where I can go sit down and he can go play, or we go to movies together, or some days I just need to watch movies on the couch and we get popcorn and we have a movie night. And to him, he thinks this is the greatest thing. But for me, it's actually me being like, I can't today. Like, I just cannot do it. Or we have pizza night, and that's because I just don't have the energy to cook today. And so you have to realize, like, yes, there's going to be so many things that you're going to be like, oh, I wish I could take my kid, up Mount Everest or whatever you want to do. And that's just not you. But your child doesn't know that, and they love you unconditionally. But I think being honest with them is really important, because I think that's the last thing you want is for them to be scared when something does happen and they have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, like creating that sense of safety or security. I don't know if any of you will know this, but do you know of any like books for children that obviously are probably not about vasculitis, but about having a parent who has an illness, or has anyone come across anything like that?
No, I've come across kids' books on Amazon, where it's like the cardiovascular system for children or dermatology for children, radiology. So it's on Amazon, like different specialties, and it kind of explains that system for children, like what bones are. So like in Heather's case, like the circulatory system, she can like show them like, this is what vessels look like, and give them an idea of kind of what she's talking about. And it's probably for older kids, like maybe like preschool age kids. But I have seen those, but nothing where it's disease specific. And I will say that there are people who this is their whole job. So I am not a pediatrician, and there are people, child life specialists and pediatricians, who are experts in talking to children about really tough topics. So I am very guarded in my own skill set when it comes to this conversation with children. And so oftentimes when they come into the clinic with their parent, or they're in the hospital, we include them in the conversations. And so we'll say, see mommy's wrist. Mommy's wrist is a little bit swollen. Do you see here? And so we'll show them and talk about the medications. Because like Heather is saying, I do want them to see me as someone to be trusted and someone who's trying to help their parent feel better. And I'll, mommy's wrist is kind of sick right now. And I will say that vasculitis is a condition that not even doctors understand. Like other doctors even other rheumatologists who don't see a lot of vasculitis, they do not fully understand vasculitis. So having grace with children and just saying, yeah, mommy's tired. Mommy needs some medicine. Mommy needs some extra rest today. And then when they come in clinic, I'll say like, how's mommy doing? What have you and mommy been up to? And they'll kind of give their input. And I think it normalizes this task that they're doing with their parent that day, knowing that their perception is important. And it actually really is. Like if they're like, oh, mommy, mommy hasn't been walking really well, or mom and I can't go to the park. I mean, that's a quality of life measure of how your children view how you're able to function and do daily tasks. And then the last thing I'll say is exactly what you were saying, Heather. Like when we talk about things like breastfeeding, I see moms beat themselves up sometimes when they're not able to breastfeed for whatever reason that is. And we have this tagline, a fed baby is a happy baby. And I think we kind of need to have that attitude going forward with parenting. If your child is safe, fed, clean, loved, in a safe environment, you are a good parent. Like you are doing everything that child needs, and your child wants to see you healthy, and they want to participate in these events that affect your life. And whether that's visiting you in the hospital, coming to your clinic visits, helping mommy with laundry that day, or helping mommy put the dishes away because my mama has lupus and this is what I do to help my mom. The kids really tend to lean into that role. Not that and I'm not saying that it's not difficult. I'm sure it is a very, very difficult thing to walk. But I think that children are very interested in just being with you. And whether that is watching movies on the couch, I mean, that sounds awesome. Eating pizza for dinner. I mean, I'm sure the kids are like not complaining about that at all. So giving yourself a little bit of grace, how you would give other people grace if they were struggling with a condition and needing some extra time to rest.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I just want to remind anyone here, if you have any questions for Heather, Kayden, or Dr. Sims, you can go ahead and put it in the Q&A box now. Otherwise, we're just going to keep talking. I guess I'll start with you, Heather, on this, and Kayden, if you want to jump in, because I know your experience since being a parent has been that you've been relatively healthy, which is great.
Yeah.
Heather, do you ever have, I don't know if there's a feeling of loss or grief or guilt when you watch your other girlfriends and as parents and you're like, oh, I can't do that thing. And how do you handle that? And it might be a lot of what Dr. Sims already said, kind of reframing, like your kids are happy to be with you and enjoy in other ways.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And again, like I mean, recently my friend did that for my son and she like took him out all day and I'm just like, I think she also has a lot of energy, but it was like they went on a walk. They walked like 2 miles to the beach. They played on the beach. They had ice cream. I mean, just like a full day. And she does this every day. And I'm just like, oh, and again, like I think that I've been sick so long too, right? I was 13 when I was diagnosed. This is just my life. So like I've just kind of learned that this is what I do. And it doesn't, well, some days I'm kind of like, oh, that's a bummer. I think I felt that more in high school where I was like, oh, darn it, like I need to rest all weekend. And, so I think I've gotten over a lot of that, like feeling of like, I'm just not the same person and I have different needs, but that doesn't mean that, you know, I'm not capable of the same things because I am. I'm working full time. I have a family. I'm married. Like I have everything that I need. It took me longer to get there. And, and that's the same thing with parenting. It's like, I can't do a full day with my son. Like I can't do a million activities with my son. I do the best that I can and we do a lot, but it's not the same as my friend. And I am so thankful for the people in his life. And I think that's the important thing, right? Is that you find and those people are provided for you usually. There's always people around you who are willing to kind of step up and be kind of that part of your child's life. And for me, I'm like, my nephews come over and we play the like Nintendo or what, we play games. And that's the part that I fulfill in their life because that's what I like to do because it doesn't include any physical activity and I can do this and I'm good at it. And it's like we're all good at different things. And after this one weekend, my girlfriend, I like sent her this long note and I was like, I just want to know you to know how much I appreciate you. And I think that's the important thing is like instead of turning it on to myself and how like bad it is for me and that I can't do all this stuff, I then turned it to her and I was just like, thank you so much for providing him because at the end of the day, he's still getting what he needs. And my husband's the same way. I can't always take my son to the park. We lived in an apartment for a long time. It was 3 flights up and 3 flights down to my car. And just thinking about it was too much for me. And depending on where my health is, some days it's not, and other days it's just a struggle. It's just a struggle to wake up and get myself going and out of bed and live, let alone 3 flights of stairs in the car, get everything in the car to the park. And there was days when that was my husband's stuff. And I can tell you that they have a beautiful relationship because of it. And so I think that you kind of have to like stop that kind of those feelings on yourself, and you have to turn those outwards and look at the people who have showed up, right? Who have showed up for your child. There's so many people who love these kids. But again, I think that's really important when you think about parenting is that like, is your life going to be able to accommodate this? I have a job that I have unlimited PTO. I had another job that I had unlimited sick leave. I need those things if I'm going to be working an 8 to 5 with possible overtime because my son has a lot of doctor's appointments. They bring home all kinds of bad stuff from daycare. I was knocked out pretty much all of April from just different stuff. And you have to have a life that kind of is going to allow you to be fulfilled, right? And so you have to be set up to deal with this. And like Kaden said, that's financial. I always have a decent nest egg because I don't know if tomorrow my disease might flare and I might be so sick that I can't work. And the last thing that you want is to be dragging your sick behind to work because you don't have what you needed financially. And so for me, like, right, this is things that most people don't have to think about. But for us, you have to kind of be a little more prepared. My mother-in-law watches my kids. That kept our first child out of daycare and away from those germs. When COVID hit, we hunkered down. I didn't go out with anything. We literally bubbled ourselves in because my immune system is not okay. And I wasn't going to risk when it was really bad and there was no vaccine. And so we had to make decisions as a family to hunker down. But again, I had a job that I could work remotely. I was able to like go someplace that bubbled us in and where I had support from my parents, and I think that's what you have to look at is like, can it be done? Yes. But is it the same as your healthy friend going out and being like, we're going to have a family. Yay. We're just going to go have, it's not because there's so much more that you have to plan for your doctor's appointments, your kids' doctor's appointments, the viruses they bring home, the school stuff. And again, like finding those groups. So I was fortunate enough, my son started school last year. I found a group of moms who like, man, we were just knocked out by these viruses. It was just a rough year for everybody, I think, because we were stuck with COVID and then the kids all come out and now there's just so much stuff going around. And we got back to back. And I had moms that like brought food to our door and were like, is there anything I can do? And so I think that's the thing is like, you have to give yourself that grace to accept help or be like, hey, what do I do with my kid? Like, and that's it. Like, right. It's like, is there somebody that they can go play with? Like, would you mind if like we came over for the day and it helps when you have other friends with kids because it's easier to have multiple kids play. And so I think that's the thing is you find a group of people and they don't always have to know you're sick. These moms I just met, it's not like I reach my hand out and I'm like, I'm Heather and I have an autoimmune disease and life is really tough for me. Like, not everybody knows right away. And at some point they will, because that's just part of my life. And they'll be like, why are you going to the doctor? Or why did you get puffy from the prednisone? And I'm always more than happy to share it. But it doesn't define who I am, which is why I don't introduce myself that way. And I think that's what you have to look at is like, I'm still my son's parent. I'm still a parent. He doesn't see me any other way. And I think that's what you have to look at is like, you're still you and you live your life and it's more complicated and things are tough and viruses are hard, but you live your life and with the right support system, like it's just like anybody else.
Yeah, you said the right support system. I'm thinking of the saying, like, it takes a village to raise a child. And that's everyone, regardless of what you're dealing with as a parent. So kind of being able to lean into that. As we sort of come to the end now, I want to turn to like some of the joy. Kaden, you had talked about having a daughter almost like keeps you in the present and keeps you distracted and not focused on the worries. Can you talk about the joy that your daughter has brought into your life?
Oh yeah, every time she smiles, you just know you're doing something right and you're a good parent. It was hard because in the hospital, I spent 21 days in the ICU and I got told multiple times like you might not be able to have kids. So we actually did a sperm. We put sperm in the sperm bank, and that wasn't the way I wanted to do things. And vasculitis had already taken so much from me, and so came out of the hospital, started feeling good. Um, we just stopped not trying, and 2 months later, we had my wife was pregnant, and we had our beautiful daughter. So that was one thing that brought some joy to me as well. Vasculitis, like I said, had taken so much from me, but that was one thing that it didn't take away from me. Um, yeah, there hasn't been a day that's went by that I haven't been super joyful that we have her in our life now. And you almost forget that you even have vasculitis because she keeps you on your toes all the time and keeps you busy. And yeah, it's been awesome. And I'm sure it just gets funner as they get older as well. So
Yeah, Heather, do you want to speak to that joy too?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same thing. Like I was in, a similar boat. I thought I would be able to have kids, and then I went and saw high risk and they were like, no, and it was probably the worst day of my life as we tried to figure things out, and thankfully, we came up with a plan. And so I think that you appreciate them that much more because they almost weren't there, right? Like there was that time where you're like, I don't even know if this is possible. And the second time was even bigger because I was like, I did it once and I did it again. Like, and they are like they're so much work. I am exhausted, but I would not, you're exhausted and yet so incredibly fulfilled that even on the bad days, and it's like that with newborns, you are exhausted. I have never been so tired in my life. Even when I'm super sick, it's just not the same. And yet that baby will smile at you at 3 a.m. and you're like, I could do this 10 more times. Like, let's do this again. And it's just, they bring so much. And I think it's that new perspective, right? Too, because everything is new to them and everything is great. And to him, I'm just his mom. And that's good enough for him. Like he doesn't know what he quote unquote is missing. This is who I am and this is what he's getting. And they love you just unconditionally for who you are, whether you're sick, whether you're healthy, whether you're just laying with them in the bed, whether you're watching a movie or you're running around with them. They love you. And it is incredibly fulfilling, in spite of like the work that it takes. But that being said, you also have to remember to take care of yourself because that is really hard when you're so involved and you're so busy and you're so, like you're just doing so much that sometimes it's easy to forget to take care of yourself because they have doctor's appointments and they have checkups and they need things and you want to take them out and you really have to. I mean, I'm a year out from the second one and I can tell you I'm behind on some things and it's on my list of priorities to be like, I got to go get those checkups with my doctor because again, like the best thing that I can do for those babies is to take care of myself.
for sure.
Yeah. I just want to add, someone had left a question about dealing with illness, children's illnesses, but I just want to let you know, Lucy, if you're listening, anyone who's listening to this call now, you're going to be emailed the recording once it's available, because yes, we did. She came a little late. So yes, we covered that earlier. So go back and listen to the recording. You can find some great information there. I guess the last thing is I'll go around to each of you. We have a few minutes left. I'm sure there's so many things, but if there's anything we haven't touched upon that you're like, oh, I really wish I could say this one thing. I guess I'm looking at you, Dr. Sims. Do you want to start? Is there anything you want to add?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is kind of like Kaden was saying, if having a family is important to you, and we don't want vasculitis to steal that from you. We don't want this to be something where you have to choose between your personal health and having a family, if that's a goal you have, or it's something that would make you happy and fulfilled. And there are different ways to have a family. And so I have certainly had conversations where I've advised against a pregnancy in the patient themselves, but there are so many different options of surrogacy and adoption. I mean, there's a lot of ways to be a parent, and it may not be the way that you had envisioned it. It may be different. But from what my patients have told me, it is just as fulfilling to be a parent to a child. And what I've observed in my patients, you will have doubts about your abilities to do things. That is normal and that is okay. And I think especially in American culture, we've really isolated parents, and asking for help, like Heather and Kaden were describing, and communicating when you need things on days where it's a little bit harder, where you need rest, you need space and just time to decompress and feel better. That's okay. And that doesn't make you a bad parent. It doesn't make you a less than parent. And that child is really just happy that they have you in their life, and they will adapt to what is occurring in your personal life with your own health. And so I would just say that find doctors that are going to walk that journey with you. So I know, Heather, you've had your vasculitis doctor for a long time, and Kaden, hopefully you can continue to have a good relationship with yours over several years. But vasculitis has its ups and downs. And so you need a doctor that's going to continue to ride those waves with you and strategize about how to make you feel better in the context of your own life. And whether that is telemedicine visits more frequently, staying out of the hospital, going into the hospital, whatever your doctor who has the best intentions for you, knows your condition, building that up as much as you can. I know it's limited in different areas of the country and the world, but as much as you can find a doctor who listens to you and values what you have to say and incorporates it into their own plan is probably one of the most valuable things that you can do for your own health, and the health of your family, and staying connected to your family throughout vasculitis.
Thank you. Kaden, do you have any final thoughts? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. No, I appreciate everybody coming on. I've learned a ton. Like I said at the beginning, super new to vasculitis, super new to parenting. So it's awesome to hear from Heather and hear her experiences with kids, and that it just gets better with time. And that's awesome to hear. So I appreciate it.
We're excited for your journey. Heather, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, there's a lot of scary things about having vasculitis and considering children. And I think at the end of the day, if that's what you want to do, and like Dr. Sims said, there's a lot of different ways that you can become a parent. And it's not always going to be the way that you thought it would happen, but it's incredibly fulfilling. It's worth the journey. And, you know, the risk of infections from children and how they're going to deal with it and how they're going to deal with you, it's such a small thing once you start kind of living that life. And I think that's probably different when you're new to vasculitis, but as somebody who's been living it for a very long time, I can tell you that you survive, and you will survive the viruses that these kids bring home. It may take you a lot longer, but it's worth it. Those viruses are more than worth the joy that you get, and the things that you can provide to these children. And I think that that's just the most important part. Like, you have to really work on your mental health too. And if you're having trouble with that and you're really feeling like you're a bad parent because of the vasculitis, then you probably should reach out to somebody, either a support group here where there's other parents who have vasculitis who understand what you're going through and can help you kind of parent through that, right? Because it's okay to feel those things, but at the same time, you shouldn't be feeling those for a long period of time. And you're good enough. We're all good enough. And the thing is again, if those are the thoughts that you're having, then you really should talk to other people about it and kind of get those out and find ways to reframe that to where you're not the inadequate parent. You just are who you are, and that is more than enough for these children.
Oh, what a beautiful message to end on. You're good enough. I want to thank everyone who joined us. For those of you who are listening to the recording, of course, Dr. Sims, Kaden, and Heather, it's a joy always to receive your expertise and your vulnerability and sharing your personal stories. And lastly, again, we're able to provide these webinars for free. Oh, Jen, you're on it. You're sharing. Thanks to our sponsors, Amgen, AstraZeneca, and Novartis. Thank you all very much. Bye.
Thank you.